hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. Beeping machines, antiseptic smell, scratchy sheets. Coulter Briggs opened his eyes to fluorescent lights and sterile white walls. His throat felt like sandpaper, and in four-tube, snaked from his arm to a hanging bag of clear fluid. A hospital room. The last thing he remembered was reaching for his welding torch in the shop, the edges of his vision darkening as the concrete floor rushed up to meet him. "Mr. Briggs? You're awake." A nurse with short brown hair adjusted something on his monitor. "You were brought in yesterday afternoon. Severe dehydration and exhaustion. Your body essentially shut down." Coulter tried to speak, but his voice came out as a rasp. "Water." The nurse handed him a plastic cup. "Small sips. You gave your employees quite a scare when they found you collapsed in your shop." "How long?" he managed after moistening his throat. "You've been here about 18 hours. The doctor wants to keep you until tomorrow morning. Make sure your electrolytes stabilize." Coulter nodded, his mind clearing. He reached for the bedside table where someone had placed his phone. "No one has come to visit yet," the nurse added, her voice carefully neutral. "We called the emergency contact in your phone, your wife, but she didn't answer. Your business partner stopped by to drop off your phone, but he couldn't stay." Coulter's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He unlocked his phone to find 17 notifications, most from his shop's management app about scheduled appointments he'd missed. Only one text message from Mallory. "Hey, can you still cover my car payment?" "No, are you okay?" "No, where are you?" "Just a request for money." After 28 years of marriage, Coulter set the phone down, his expression unchanging except for a slight hardening around his eyes. The nurse was still talking, something about rest and fluids, but her words washed over him without registering. In that moment, Coulter made a decision. He would stop pretending, stop making excuses, stop covering for absences at family dinners and ignoring the disappearing money from their accounts. Stop pretending he had a family who cared whether he lived or died. "Mr. Briggs? Did you hear me? I asked if there's someone else we should call for you." Coulter looked at the nurse, his blue eyes clear and cold as mountain water. "No," he said. "There's no one." The next morning, Coulter signed his discharge papers against medical advice. The doctor, a young woman with tired eyes, tried to convince him to stay another day. "Mr. Briggs, your body is sending you clear signals that you're pushing too hard. Working 16-hour days 6 times a week isn't sustainable, even for someone in peak condition." "I hear you," Coulter said, already buttoning his flannel shirt. His movements were precise, efficient. Military training never quite left a man. "I'll make changes." He would too, just not the kind she was suggesting. Outside the hospital, he called Tanner, who arrived within 15 minutes in his battered Dodge pickup. Tanner Holt was Coulter's age, with salt and pepper hair cropped short and permanent grease stains under his fingernails. They'd been friends since high school and business partners for nearly 2 decades at Briggs and Holt Auto Body. "You look like warmed over death," Tanner said by way of greeting. "Feel about the same." Coulter climbed into the passenger seat, his movements still stiff. Tanner drove in silence for several minutes, occasionally glancing at his friend. Finally, as they waited at a red light, he spoke. "So Mallory didn't show, huh?" Coulter stared straight ahead. "No." "And Rowan?" "No." Tanner gripped the steering wheel tighter. "You going home now?" "Not home. The shop first. Doc said you need rest." "What I need," Coulter interrupted, his voice level and controlled, "is to see the security footage from the past month." Tanner's expression darkened. "Coulter, I know what you're thinking, that I'm paranoid, that I'm jumping to conclusions. But we both know better." Tanner sighed heavily. "You've been suspecting for a while now." "Suspecting, yes. Knowing and accepting are different things. And now you're ready to know." Coulter turned to look at his oldest friend. "Now I'm ready to act." The shop was quiet when they arrived, the other mechanics having been given the day off after Coulter's collapse. The familiar smells of oil, metal, and rubber were strangely comforting. This place at least made sense. Parts fitting together as they should, problems with clear solutions, honest work for honest pay. Coulter settled into the small office in the back, logging into the security system. 6 months ago, they'd installed cameras throughout the shop after a series of tool thefts. The system backed up to cloud storage and, at Mallory's suggestion, synced with their home security setup for convenience. Tanner hovered in the doorway. "Want me to go?" "Stay if you want. Won't change what's there." Coulter navigated to the footage from their lakeside home, scrolling backward through time. He started with yesterday, then moved to the day before and the weeks prior. A methodical search, like everything else he did. It didn't take long to find what he was looking for, that a silver Audi pulling into their driveway when he was scheduled to be at the shop. A man in his 30s, well-dressed, entering their front door without knocking. And Mallory greeting him with more enthusiasm than she'd shown Coulter in years. "That's Callum Sayers," Tanner said, his voice tight. "The guy who tried to get investors for that bogus resort development last year." Coulter nodded once, his face expressionless as he continued scanning through different dates. The pattern was clear. Twice a week, sometimes more. Always during Coulter's long work days. "Maybe it's not what it looks like," Tanner offered weakly. Coulter didn't respond, just continued scrolling through footage. And then he froze the screen. There was his son, Rowan, speaking with Callum in the driveway. And then Coulter zoomed in, handing over what was unmistakably Coulter's spare house key. Tanner swore under his breath. "How long you figure?" he asked after a moment. "Based on the footage? At least 3 months." Coulter's voice was flat. "But that's not the important part." "What is?" "Rowan knew. Has known. Probably covered for her before I installed the cameras." Something shifted in Coulter's expression, not hurt, not even anger, but a cold finality. He closed the laptop and stood up. "What are you going to do?" Tanner asked. "Confront them?" Coulter shook his head. "Nothing to say. You got to say something, man. 28 years of marriage is over." Coulter pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "This is Coulter Briggs. I need an appointment with Gerald Monroe. Today, if possible." He listened for a moment. "Yes, it's urgent. Tell him it's about dissolving my marriage and restructuring my business assets." After hanging up, he looked at Tanner. "I need a ride to the bank, then to Monroe's office." "Jesus, Coulter." Just like that. Just like that." Coulter picked up his jacket. "They made their choice a long time ago. Now I'm making mine." By that afternoon, Coulter had withdrawn half of all shared accounts, exactly half. Not a penny more, and opened new accounts at a different bank. He'd spent 2 hours with Gerald Monroe, the attorney who had handled the shop's incorporation, setting in motion the legal machinery that would disentangle his life from Mallory's and protect the business from potential claims. "You sure about this approach?" Gerald had asked. "Most clients want to pursue evidence of infidelity for leverage in the settlement." "I'm not most clients," Coulter had replied. "I don't want leverage. I want out. Clean and final." Now, as evening approached, Coulter stood in the driveway of his home, the house, not home anymore, and steeled himself to enter. He knew Mallory would be at her book club until 8, and Rowan rarely came home before midnight. It gave him just enough time. Inside, the house felt different already, as if his new knowledge had physically altered the space. He moved efficiently through the rooms, gathering only what he truly needed: clothes, his father's watch, military service documents, and a small wooden box containing his mother's wedding ring and a few photographs. In the master bedroom. Evidence of Mallory's betrayal was everywhere once he allowed himself to see it. A different perfume on her pillow. 2 wine glasses in the en-suite bathroom trash. Receipts from restaurants he'd never visited. Coulter packed methodically, his movements economical. When he finished, he left his wedding ring on the dresser along with a single folded note. "You've made your choice. You're on your own. Forever." He drove to the small apartment above the shop that they kept for visiting clients, setting down his 2 bags and laptop with military precision. The space was sparse but functional. Like him, 15 minutes later, his phone rang. "Mallory." He let go to voicemail. Then a text. "Where are you? Where's the money? What's going on?" Then another. "You can't just empty our accounts. Call me right now." Then Rowan. "Dad, what the hell? Mom's freaking out. Whatever you think is happening, you're wrong. Call us back." Coulter read each message without emotion, then blocked both numbers. He sent one text to Tanner. "It's done. I'll be at the shop apartment tonight and tomorrow. We should talk about the business restructuring." Then he turned off his phone, sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time since waking in the hospital, allowed himself to feel the full weight of what had happened. Not grief, not rage, just a cold, clear certainty that everything he'd built his life around had been a lie. Coulter Briggs didn't weep. He didn't throw things or curse the heavens. He simply sat, back straight, hands on his knees, breathing steadily as he accepted this new reality and began to plan his next moves. The man who had given everything, his youth, his labor, his loyalty, now gave nothing, and he never would again. 3 days passed. Coulter moved through them with the discipline that had defined his life, focusing on the shop, on paperwork, on the mechanical tasks that had always centered him. He slept little, but functioned well, a skill learned during his military service. Tanner gave him space, but stayed close, a silent support system who understood that words were unnecessary. But on the morning of the 4th day, Coulter's new phone rang, a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer, but years of business ownership had taught him that unknown numbers could be potential customers. Briggs speaking. "Dad." Rowan's voice, breathless and panicked. "Dad, you have to help. Mom is missing." Coulter said nothing, just listened to his son's ragged breathing on the other end of the line. "Did you hear me? Mom's gone. Her car was found by the lake this morning. Empty. The police are asking questions. They want to talk to you." The silence stretched between them. Coulter could picture his son's face so much like Mallory's, with the same expressive eyes that could convey sincerity even when lying. "Dad, are you there?" "I'm here." Coulter's voice betrayed nothing. "Well, say something." "Mom is missing." "What do you want me to say, Rowan?" "What do I?" "Jesus Christ, Dad. I want you to care. I want you to come home and help figure out what happened. The police think." His voice broke. "They're treating it like she might have hurt herself. Because of the divorce papers. They found them in her car." "Ah, so she'd received Gerald's courier delivery. Fast work." "Your mother," Coulter said evenly, "is an adult who makes her own choices. How can you be so cold? After everything." "Yes," Coulter interrupted. "After everything." He could hear Rowan's sharp intake of breath. "This is about those security videos, isn't it? You think you know what was happening, but you don't understand." "I understand perfectly. You gave another man the key to my house. The house I paid for, where your mother was sleeping with him in my bed." The words hung between them, stark and undeniable. "Dad, it wasn't. We didn't." "Save it, Rowan. I'm done with lies." "So that's it? Mom might be dead, and you're just going to sit there because you're angry about." "Your mother," Coulter said with absolute certainty, "is not dead. She's setting the stage, making me look responsible. It's a performance like everything else has been. You're crazy. You finally lost it." Rowan's voice hardened. "The police will want to know why you emptied the accounts, why you served divorce papers without warning, how you've been controlling and isolating Mom for years." Coulter almost laughed at that. "Almost. Is that the story she's been telling? That I controlled her? The woman who spent $40,000 last year on personal expenses? Who took 3 trips to Phoenix while I worked 70-hour weeks? You were never there. You were always at that damn shop. And now we get to the truth." Coulter's voice remained level. "I was never there because I was working, providing, building something for us. For you. We didn't need money. We needed you present." "Present for what, Rowan? To watch you take and take without contributing? To see your mother's affairs? To pretend we were a family when you both just used me as a bank account?" Silence again. Then Rowan's voice, cold and unfamiliar. "You're going to regret this, Dad. When they find Mom, if they find Mom, I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you really are." Coulter ended the call without another word. He set the phone down carefully on the counter, walked to the bathroom, and splashed cold water on his face. Looking in the mirror, he saw the same man he'd always been, lines deeper, perhaps, eyes harder, but fundamentally unchanged. Let them try to destroy his reputation. Let them play their games with the police and public opinion. He knew where this was going, and he let it burn. By noon, 2 police officers arrived at the shop. Detective Ryan Maddox, a heavy-set man with shrewd eyes, and his partner, a younger woman named Officer Jensen. "Mr. Briggs, we'd like to ask you a few questions about your wife." Coulter led them to the office, offered coffee which they declined, and sat across from them with perfect composure. "When did you last see Mallory Briggs?" Detective Maddox asked. "4 days ago, before I moved out." "And why did you move out so suddenly?" "I discovered my wife was having an affair. Had been for months. My son was facilitating it." Officer Jensen raised her eyebrows, but kept writing. Maddox leaned forward. "That must have made you angry." "It was clarifying." "Clarifying?" Maddox repeated. "Clarifying enough to empty your joint accounts." "I took exactly half of our shared assets. I left her half. It's all documented." "And the divorce papers?" "Bit sudden, wasn't it?" Coulter met his gaze steadily. "Detective, what does this have to do with Mallory's supposed disappearance?" "Supposed?" Maddox's eyes narrowed. "Her car was found by the lake. She wasn't in it. That's not a disappearance. That's a scene. You think she's staging this?" "I know she is." Maddox exchanged glances with Jensen. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Briggs." "It's not an accusation. It's an observation based on 28 years of marriage. Your son seems genuinely concerned." "My son," Coulter said flatly, "gave another man the key to my house so he could sleep with my wife. His concern is as genuine as her disappearance." Maddox sat back. "Where were you last night between 8 p.m. and 2 a.m.? "Here, working on the Henderson rebuild until about midnight. Then in the apartment upstairs." "Can anyone verify that?" "The security cameras can." "And I ordered food at 8:30. The delivery person came at 9:10. The questions continued for another 20 minutes, but Coulter's story never wavered. Finally, the officers stood to leave. "We'll need access to those security feeds," Maddox said. "Of course. I've already downloaded the relevant footage." Coulter handed over a USB drive. "It includes the past week of the shop's exterior and interior cameras, plus the last 3 months of my home security footage. You'll find it educational." Maddox pocketed the drive with a curious expression. "You seem very prepared, Mr. Briggs. I value evidence, detective, over emotions or accusations." As they left, Coulter returned to the engine he'd been rebuilding. His hands were steady, his movements precise. He wasn't worried. The truth would emerge, as it always did, and he had plenty of it on his side. The first rumor reached Coulter through Tanner 2 days later. Mallory had reappeared, claiming she needed space after Coulter's emotionally abusive behavior had driven her to despair. She was staying with a friend, not Callum, interestingly, and telling anyone who would listen how Coulter had controlled every aspect of their lives, isolated her from friends, and monitored her spending oppressively. "She's saying you installed those security cameras to track her movements," Tanner said, leaning against the shop's front counter. "That you used to time how long she was gone and demand explanations for every minute." Coulter continued entering inventory numbers into the computer. "And people believe her. Some do. She's got a way of telling it, all teary-eyed and fragile. You know how she gets." Yes, he did know. The same performance that had convinced him 25 years ago that her overnight disappearance had been due to feeling overwhelmed rather than the affair he'd later discovered. The same act that had persuaded him to forgive her misuse of their credit cards multiple times over the years. "Rowan's backing her up," Tanner continued. "All over social media. Says you were cold, controlling, never there for them emotionally." Coulter saved his work and closed the program. "Interesting angle." "Interesting? That's all you've got to say? They're trying to destroy your reputation, man." Coulter turned to face his friend. "They can try. What's that supposed to mean?" Instead of answering directly, Coulter opened his desk drawer and removed a small digital recorder. "Did you know Oregon is a one-party consent state for recordings? Only one person in the conversation needs to know it's being recorded." Tanner's eyes widened. "You've been recording them?" "For years. At first for my own sanity, to make sure I wasn't misremembering conversations. Later, as insurance." He connected the recorder to his computer and clicked through several files, finally selecting one and pressing play. Mallory's voice filled the small office. "I don't care if you're tired. The Andersons invited us to their lake house, and we're going. You know Richard could send a lot of business our way." Coulter's voice, sounding exhausted. "I've been working 16 hours a day all week. Can't you go without me? Tell them I'm sick. And look like I have an absent husband? Again? No, you're coming. Wear the blue shirt I bought you. And try to smile for once. Mallory, I'm dead on my feet. I don't want to hear it. Do you know how it looks when you're never at these events? People talk, Coulter. They wonder if we're having problems. And are we? A pause. Then her voice, suddenly sweet. Of course not, honey. I just need you to make an effort. For me. For us. Coulter stopped the recording. That was 3 years ago. Here's one from last year. Another click. Mallory again, her tone venomous. Don't you dare question my spending again. You think I don't know about your little spreadsheets? Tracking every dime? It's pathetic. It's not about tracking. It's about the fact that we can't afford another $30,000 in credit card debt. We're still paying off last year's. We can afford whatever I say we can afford. Your business made record profits. The business did. That doesn't mean we personally. I deserve nice things, Coulter. I put up with your emotional distance, your obsession with work, your boring routines and silences for decades. The least you can do is let me enjoy myself. Mallory, be reasonable. If you ever try to limit my spending again, I will tell everyone exactly what kind of cold, controlling bastard you really are. I'll make sure your precious reputation in this town is destroyed. Try me. Tanner let out a low whistle as Coulter stopped the recording. There are dozens more, Coulter said quietly. Threats, manipulation, gaslighting, plus complete documentation of every penny I earned, every bill I paid, every luxury I provided while being told it wasn't enough. And Rowan, Coulter's jaw tightened slightly. I have recordings of him too, demanding money, lying about what it was for, promising to try harder before disappearing again for weeks. He pulled up a video file, this time footage from the home security system, showing Rowan and Mallory in the kitchen, unaware they were being recorded. So Dad has no idea about Callum? Rowan asked, pouring himself a drink. Of course not, Mallory replied. He's clueless. Always has been. And you're sure Callum's business is going to take off this time? The last one was a disaster. It will. And when it does, we'll have options. What if Dad finds out before then? Mallory's laugh was cold. He won't. But even if he did, what's he going to do? Leave? Please. He's too dependent on the image of the perfect family man. Too afraid of being alone. Rowan looked uncomfortable. He'd cut us off. Temporarily, maybe. But I've hidden enough away that we'd be fine until I could get a settlement. And you know I'd take care of you. I don't know, Mom. Dad's not stupid. No. But he's predictable. Loyal to a fault. It's his weakness. Coulter stopped the video. Tanner was staring at the screen, shock evident on his face. Jesus, Coulter. Now you understand, Coulter said. They could try to destroy my reputation. They can spread whatever rumors they want. But when this goes to court, and it will, I'll be ready. You're not going to release this stuff publicly? No, I don't need public vindication. I just need to win. Tanner shook his head slowly. All these years, I had no idea. I mean, I knew things weren't perfect, but this, neither did I, Coulter said, his voice betraying the first hint of emotion, not pain, but a deep, controlled anger. Not the full extent. Not until I stopped making excuses for them. What's your next move? Coulter turned back to his computer. I wait. They'll escalate. Make more accusations. Try to force a confrontation or a settlement. A thin smile appeared. And then I'll show them exactly who they've been underestimating. A week passed. The rumors intensified. Coulter's phone rang constantly, with concerned friends and acquaintances, some offering support, others fishing for gossip. He answered none of them except Tanner and his attorney. Gerald Monroe called on Friday morning. Coulter, are you aware that your wife is claiming you hid assets from her? She's filed an emergency petition for spousal support, claiming financial abandonment. I expected as much, Coulter replied, standing in the quiet of his office. What's her evidence? She claims there must be business accounts she doesn't know about. Says your reported income couldn't possibly cover all your expenses plus hers. She's right about that. It couldn't. That's why we're in debt. I've been paying off while she kept spending. I'm going to need complete financial records, Coulter. Everything. Bank statements, tax returns, business income, personal expenses. We need to show the court exactly where every dollar went. You'll have it today. After hanging up, Coulter stared at the wall for a long moment. He needed more than financial records. He needed to know what else Mallory might be hiding. That afternoon, he drove to the city records office, a small brick building downtown where property deeds, business licenses, and other public documents were kept. He'd been there many times over the years for business permits. The woman at the front desk, Bridget Rayner, greeted him with a professional nod. "Mr. Briggs, what can I help you with today? I need to look up property records. Specifically, any properties held in trust in Deschutes County in the past 5 years." Bridget's expression revealed nothing, but her eyes held a glimmer of understanding. "That's quite broad. Any particular trust names you're interested in?" "I have a few ideas," Coulter said, "but I'd rather cast a wide net." She nodded. "Follow me to the research terminals. I can help you narrow your search." In a small room lined with computers, Bridget logged him into a database and showed him the basic search functions. As she leaned over to type, Coulter noticed her wedding ring was missing, though the pale band of skin where it had been remained. "Thank you," he said when she finished. "I appreciate your help." She hesitated, then spoke quietly. "Mr. Briggs, I don't normally do this, but I might have some information that would interest you." Coulter studied her face. "What kind of information?" "The kind that isn't in the public records yet." She glanced toward the door. "My shift ends at 5. There's a coffee shop around the corner, Miller's. I'll be there at 5:15. With that, she returned to the front desk, leaving Coulter to conduct his search. By 4:30, he found something interesting: a lake property purchased 2 years ago by the Phoenix Rising Trust. The name meant nothing to him, but the timing coincided with one of Mallory's trips to Phoenix at T5:15 precisely. Coulter sat at a corner table in Miller's Coffee, a ceramic mug of black coffee warming his hands. Bridget arrived moments later, her brown hair now loose from its workday bun, making her look younger than her mid-40s. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "You said you had information." Bridget wrapped her hands around her own coffee mug. 3 years ago, my husband Alan invested everything we had, our savings, our retirement funds, even a second mortgage on our house, in a resort development. Sunset Pines. The developer promised 20% returns within 18 months. Coulter's eyes narrowed slightly. "Callum Sayers?" She nodded. "You know him." "I know of him. What you might not know is who was backing him financially, who really controlled the project." She took a deep breath. "It was a woman named Mallory Briggs. Your wife." The revelation didn't shock Coulter as much as it might have once. "Go on." "The development failed spectacularly. Alan and I lost everything, over $200,000. Our house, his parents' inheritance. We weren't the only ones, but we were hit the hardest because Alan had brought in other investors, friends, family. When it all collapsed, he couldn't face them. Or me." Her voice faltered. "He took his life 16 months ago." Coulter said nothing, allowing her the space to continue. "Afterward, while going through his papers, I found documentation showing that Mallory Briggs was the primary financial backer. She created a shell company that funded Callum's operation. When things went south, she pulled out, but not before transferring the remaining assets to a trust. The Phoenix Rising Trust. The lake property," Coulter said. Bridget nodded. "And 2 others that won't show up in your search because they're not in Deschutes County. One's in Bend and one's on the coast." "How do you know this?" She reached into her bag and pulled out a manila envelope. "Because I've been tracking them since Alan died. At first because I wanted justice, or at least answers. Later because I guess I needed something to focus on." Coulter took the envelope. "Why are you giving me this?" Bridget met his gaze directly. "Because I've seen what your wife and Callum Sayers are capable of, the lives they've destroyed. And because the rumors they're spreading about you sound exactly like the lies they told investors when things went bad, that Alan was depressed, unstable, made poor decisions without consulting his partners." She stood to leave, then paused. "I'm not looking for revenge, Mr. Briggs. Just consequence." For once. After she left, Coulter opened the envelope. Inside were property records, bank statements, incorporation documents, and emails, all pointing to a complex financial arrangement between Mallory and Callum dating back at least 5 years. Property purchased with credit lines secured against Coulter's business assets. Investments funded by loans taken out in both their names, but which only she had signed for IT was more than evidence of an affair. It was fraud. Coulter carefully resealed the envelope and drove directly to Gerald Monroe's office, arriving just as the attorney was preparing to leave for the day. "I need you to look at these," Coulter said, placing the envelope on Gerald's desk. "Tonight, if possible." Gerald sighed, but sat back down. "What am I looking at, Coulter?" "The truth." As Gerald reviewed the documents, his expression grew increasingly grave. "This is significant. If these records are authentic," "They are," "then your wife has committed multiple instances of fraud, using your credit and assets without permission, falsifying loan documents." He looked up at Coulter. "This goes well beyond divorce proceedings. This is potentially criminal." "I don't want her arrested," Coulter said. "I want her exposed. In court. Under oath. With these documents as evidence." Gerald leaned back in his chair. "You do realize what this means? With this evidence, you could take everything. The house, the properties, full restitution, punitive damages. Good. It will destroy her financially. Possibly Rowan too, if he was knowingly involved." Coulter's expression didn't change. They made their choice. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in early March. Overnight, the temperature had dropped, and a thin layer of ice coated the courthouse steps as Coulter made his way inside, Gerald Monroe at his side. "Remember," Gerald murmured as they entered the courtroom, "let me do the talking. Judge Kinsey isn't known for patience. She'll cut through the emotional appeals quickly, but we need to stay focused on the facts." Coulter nodded once, his posture military straight in his charcoal gray suit. He'd slept well the night before, his conscience clear for the first time in years. The courtroom was sparsely populated, a few legal aides, a court reporter, in the back row, Tanner, who gave Coulter a supportive nod. No sign yet of Mallory or Rowan. They arrived 5 minutes before the scheduled start, Mallory in a conservative navy dress that made her look smaller, more vulnerable than her usual confident self. Rowan followed in a suit that looked new, his expression a mixture of anxiety and hostility. A tall man in an expensive suit accompanied them. Brandon Walsh, one of the most aggressive divorce attorneys in the county. Mallory's eyes locked with Coulter's across the room. For a split second, her mask slipped, and he saw what he'd been missing for years, the cold calculation behind the charm. Then her lips trembled, her shoulders hunched slightly, and she was once again the wounded party. Judge Marla Kinsey entered, a tall woman in her mid-50s with silver-streaked black hair pulled back severely from her face. Everyone rose, then sat at her command. "Briggs versus Briggs," she announced, peering over her reading glasses at the parties before her. "Preliminary hearing regarding emergency spousal support and asset freezing." She set down the file. "Mr. Walsh, I understand your client is seeking immediate financial relief?" Brandon Walsh stood, radiating righteous indignation. "Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Briggs has been financially abandoned by her husband of 28 years. He emptied their joint accounts, cut off her credit cards, and left her without means of support, all as punishment for her finally standing up to his controlling behavior." Judge Kinsey's expression remained neutral. "And the asset freezing request. We have reason to believe Mr. Briggs is hiding substantial assets through his business. We're asking that all accounts, personal and business, be frozen pending a complete forensic accounting." "Mr. Monroe." The judge turned to Gerald. "Your Honor, these claims are not only false but represent a continuation of Mrs. Briggs's pattern of financial manipulation and dishonesty." Gerald stood calmly. "My client withdrew exactly half of their joint assets, not a penny more, and left the remainder available to Mrs. Briggs. Furthermore, we have documentation showing that Mrs. Briggs has been engaging in financial fraud for years, including forging my client's signature on loan documents and using his business as collateral without his knowledge." Walsh scoffed. Preposterous accusations meant to distract from Mr. Briggs's vindictive actions. Judge Kinsey held up a hand. "I'll be the judge of that, counselor." She turned back to Gerald. "You have documentation of these allegations?" "Yes, Your Honor. Extensive documentation, which we've submitted with our response." Gerald nodded to Coulter, who opened his briefcase and handed over a thick folder. including evidence that Mrs. Briggs has hidden assets in at least 3 properties purchased through a trust using fraudulently obtained funds. Judge Kinsey took the folder and spent several minutes reviewing its contents, her expression growing increasingly stern. Meanwhile, Mallory whispered frantically to her attorney, her composure slipping. Finally, the judge looked up. "These are serious allegations, Mr. Monroe. If authenticated, they would constitute fraud. They've been authenticated, Your Honor. The notarized affidavits from the lending institutions confirm the signature discrepancies. The property records speak for themselves." Walsh was on his feet again. "Your Honor, even if there were financial irregularities, they occurred within the context of a marriage where Mr. Briggs was emotionally absent and controlling. Mrs. Briggs was simply trying to establish some independence. By committing fraud." Judge Kinsey interrupted sharply. "That's not independence, Mr. Walsh. That's criminal behavior. We'd like to call Mrs. Briggs to testify about the emotional context of this marriage," Walsh pressed. "Very well." Judge Kinsey nodded. "Mrs. Briggs, please approach the stand." Mallory took the oath with perfect composure, her voice soft but clear. Once seated, she transformed before the court's eyes, shoulders slightly hunched, hands clasped tightly, eyes downcast. The picture of a woman intimidated by her husband's presence. "Mrs. Briggs," Walsh began gently, "how would you describe your marriage to Coulter Briggs?" "At first, it was good," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Coulter was kind, attentive. But after Rowan was born, something changed. He became distant, critical. His work became everything. I was expected to maintain the perfect home, the perfect appearance, while receiving less and less emotional support. And financially, Coulter controlled everything. Every purchase questioned, every expense tracked. I had an allowance, like a child." Her voice hardened momentarily before she caught herself. "I had to account for every penny while he poured thousands into his business without consultation. Is that why you saw financial independence through these other arrangements?" "Yes," she said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I was desperate for some control over my own life. Maybe I made mistakes, but they came from years of emotional neglect." Walsh nodded sympathetically. "Any affair that Mr. Briggs alleges?" Mallory's lip trembled. "Callum was a friend who understood what I was going through. It became more only recently, after years of loneliness in my marriage. I'm not proud of it, but I was desperate for connection." Walsh turned to the judge. "As you can see, Your Honor, the context matters. Mrs. Briggs's actions, while perhaps not technically correct, were the result of an emotionally abusive relationship." "Objection," Gerald interrupted. "Counsel is characterizing the relationship as abusive without evidence." "Sustained," Judge Kinsey said. "Mr. Walsh, stick to questions you can substantiate." Walsh nodded. "No further questions for now, Your Honor." "Mr. Monroe, your cross-examination." Gerald approached slowly, a thin folder in his hands. "Mrs. Briggs, you testified that your husband became emotionally distant after your son was born. When was that?" 25 years ago." "And when did you begin your relationship with Callum Sayers?" She hesitated. "About 8 months ago." Gerald opened the folder. "I have here credit card statements showing you and Mr. Sayers stayed at the same hotel in Phoenix 3 years ago, and again 2 years ago, and rental car receipts showing you both rented vehicles in San Diego 4 years ago. Were those business trips?" Mallory's composure slipped. We knew each other professionally before." "Mrs. Briggs, you're under oath," Gerald reminded her. "Let me be more direct. Has your relationship with Callum Sayers been ongoing for at least 4 years?" Her eyes darted to Walsh, who looked equally surprised. "I don't recall exactly when." "Let me refresh your memory." Gerald produced a printed email. "This is a message from you to Mr. Sayers dated January 15th, 4 years ago. It reads, and I quote, 'Missing last weekend already. Coulter suspects nothing. Can't wait for Phoenix next month.'" He looked up. "Does that help establish the timeline?" Mallory's face flushed. "That's private. It's evidence, Mrs. Briggs. As are these." He placed more documents before her. "Bank transfers from accounts in your name to Mr. Sayers. Property purchased jointly through the Phoenix Rising Trust. Loan applications with my client's forged signature, dating back 5 years. The courtroom was silent as Mallory stared at the evidence before her. Now, Gerald continued, you testified that your husband controlled all finances and questioned every purchase. Yet these statements show you spent over $120,000 last year alone on personal expenses. Was that your allowance? Mallory's mask cracked completely. He wasn't supposed to track everything. A normal husband would trust. A normal husband, Gerald interrupted, wouldn't need to track expenses because a normal wife wouldn't be secretly funneling money to her lover and committing fraud. Objection. Walsh called. Badgering. Sustained. Judge Kinsey said. Rephrase, Mr. Monroe. Gerald nodded. Mrs. Briggs, did you or did you not forge your husband's signature on loan documents using his business as collateral? Mallory's lips pressed into a thin line. I had his permission. Really? I have here an affidavit from the notary who supposedly witnessed those signatures, stating that you came alone and presented the documents as already signed. Gerald placed another paper before her. Would you like to revise your statement? Mallory fell silent, her eyes now hard and calculating. Gerald turned to the judge. Your Honor, Mrs. Briggs's testimony is directly contradicted by documented evidence. We have much more, but I believe the court has seen enough to make a preliminary determination. Judge Kinsey nodded. I agree. Mr. Walsh, do you have additional witnesses? Walsh looked shaken but rallied. Yes, Your Honor. We'd like to call Rowan Briggs to testify about his father's controlling behavior. Rowan took the stand, shooting a venomous glance at Coulter, who met his gaze impassively. Rowan, Walsh began, how would you describe your father's behavior in your home growing up? Cold, distant. Everything had to be his way. Rowan's voice was bitter. He was physically there sometimes, but never emotionally. It was like living with a robot. And your mother, she tried to make up for it, to give me a normal life despite him. She protected me from his coldness. Did you witness your father controlling your mother financially? Rowan nodded. All the time. He questioned every purchase, demand receipts. He installed security cameras everywhere, supposedly for safety, but really to monitor our comings and goings. And were you aware of your mother's relationship with Mr. Sayers? Not until recently. She was lonely. Dad had checked out of their marriage years ago. Walsh nodded sympathetically. Thank you, Rowan. No further questions. Gerald approached, his expression neutral. Rowan, you testified that your father was controlling and monitored your activities through security cameras. Were those cameras installed? About 6 months ago. And why were they installed? Rowan shrugged. Like I said, to control us. Actually, they were installed after a series of thefts at the auto shop, were they not? I guess. Gerald turned to the judge. Your Honor, we have the police report regarding those thefts and the insurance recommendation for the security system. Judge Kinsey nodded. Noted. Gerald turned back to Rowan. Now, you say your father was financially controlling. Did he pay for your college education? Yes, but all 4 years, despite you changing majors 3 times, correct? That's not. Did he also provide you with a car, insurance, a monthly allowance, and an apartment even after you dropped out in your senior year? Rowan's face darkened. That's what parents are supposed to do. I see. And what have you contributed to the household in the past 3 years since returning home? I've been figuring things out. Figuring things out, Gerald repeated. While living rent-free, with all expenses paid, in the home your father worked 70-hour weeks to maintain. Is that correct? It's not like that. Then please explain what it's like. Gerald produced a small digital recorder. Or perhaps this recording of you and your mother discussing your father will explain it better. Rowan paled visibly. What recording? Gerald played the clip already heard by the court in pre-submitted evidence Rowan and Mallory discussing Coulter's cluelessness and how they would handle him if he discovered the affair. That's you can't just record people secretly. Rowan sputtered. Oregon is a one-party consent state, Gerald replied calmly. And the home security system your father installed, the one you claim, was meant to control you records with clear notification posted at all entrances, as required by law. Rowan looked desperately toward Walsh, who was reviewing documents with increasing alarm. One final question, Gerald said. Did you give Callum Sayers a key to your father's house to facilitate his affair with your mother? The courtroom fell silent. Rowan's gaze dropped to his hands. Mr. Briggs? Judge Kinsey prompted. Yes, Rowan finally muttered. I gave him a key. Thank you. Gerald returned to his seat. No further questions. Judge Kinsey removed her glasses. I've heard enough. Based on the evidence presented, I'm denying the motion for emergency spousal support. Furthermore, I'm granting Mr. Briggs's countermotion for a full accounting of all marital assets, including those held in the Phoenix Rising Trust and any other entities established by Mrs. Briggs. Walsh tried to interject, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. Let me be clear, she continued, her voice sharp. The evidence of financial misconduct is overwhelming. Mr. Briggs has established that he did not empty accounts, but rather took his rightful half. Meanwhile, Mrs. Briggs appears to have been hiding substantial assets while committing what could charitably be called financial infidelity and less charitably fraud. She turned her stern gaze on Mallory and Rowan. You didn't just bite the hand that fed you. You used it to slap the man who built your lives. You get nothing. Coulter remained perfectly still, his expression unchanged as Judge Kinsey issued her ruling. Only Tanner, watching closely from the back row, noticed the slight relaxing of his friend's shoulders, the first sign of relief he'd shown in weeks. Outside the courtroom, Mallory attempted one final performance, approaching Coulter with tears streaming down her face. How could you humiliate me like this? She demanded, her voice breaking. After everything we've been through? 28 years, Coulter. Doesn't that mean anything to you? Coulter really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years. He saw not the young woman he'd fallen in love with, nor the mother of his child, but a stranger who had used him, betrayed him, and now expected his pity. It meant everything to me, he said quietly. That's why I worked myself to exhaustion providing for you both. That's why I ignored the signs for years. That's why I forgave the first affair and the credit card debt and Rowan's constant taking. His eyes were clear, his voice steady. But it meant nothing to you. So now, it means nothing to me. He turned and walked away, Tanner falling in a step beside him, leaving Mallory staring after him, her manipulative tears forgotten in the face of genuine shock. For the first time in their marriage, Coulter Briggs had broken the script, and he would never return to it again. The eviction notice arrived at the lakeside house exactly 60 days after the preliminary hearing. Mallory had fought it, of course filing motion after desperate motion, each denied by various judges who reviewed the mounting evidence of her financial misconduct. The Phoenix Rising Trust was dissolved by court order, its assets transferred to Coulter as restitution. The properties hidden in its name, now, legally, his on a rainy Tuesday in May. Coulter drove past the house just once. A moving truck sat in the driveway, Mallory directing movers with frantic gestures, Rowan carrying boxes to his decade-old Subaru that Coulter had fully paid for. They didn't notice him, and he didn't stop. He continued to the shop, where business was thriving despite, or perhaps because of the quiet dignity with which he'd handled the very public dissolution of his marriage. People in small towns respected resilience, and Coulter had shown nothing else. They're clearing out today, he told Tanner matter-of-factly as he checked the day's appointments. Tanner glanced up from the engine he was diagnosing. You okay with that? Why wouldn't I be? I don't know. 28 years. Your son. Gotta be some feelings there. Coulter considered this, then shook his head slightly. It ended a long time ago. Today's just paperwork catching up to reality. Tanner nodded, understanding his friend better now than he had in all their decades of friendship. Coulter had never been cold. He'd been containing a furnace of loyalty and dedication that had burned him from the inside when betrayed. Heard Mallory's staying at the Pineview Motel, Tanner said after a moment. Callum split town weeks ago. Apparently had debts all over the county. Not surprised, Coulter said, checking inventory numbers on his computer. Rowan's been doing odd jobs for the Henderson landscaping crew. Tanner hesitated. Kid's actually working for the first time in his life. Coulter said nothing, just continued with his task. His silence was neither vindictive nor satisfied, just the quiet acknowledgement of consequences finally arriving where they belonged. Later that afternoon, a familiar face appeared at the shop. Delaney Kerr, the social worker who had briefly counseled Coulter during his hospital stay months earlier. She'd been one of the few people he'd opened up to in those first raw days after discovery. "Mr. Briggs," she greeted him, her voice professional but warm. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd check how you're doing." Coulter wiped his hands on a shop towel. "Doing fine, Ms. Kerr. Thank you for asking. I heard today was the eviction date." He nodded once. "It was." Delaney studied him, her perceptive eyes taking in the subtle changes since she'd last seen him, the fewer lines of tension around his mouth, the steadier hands. "You look better than when we last spoke," she observed. "I am better. Do you attribute that to the legal victory? The vindication?" Coulter considered her question seriously. "No, those things weren't the goal. Just steps toward freedom." "Freedom," she repeated thoughtfully. "From a marriage? Or something else?" "From pretending." Coulter surprised himself with the admission. "From carrying the weight of other people's choices and calling it love." Delaney smiled slightly. "That's quite an insight. Had a lot of time to think." She nodded, then changed the subject. "I hear you started a scholarship foundation." "My father's name. For trade school students who've lost parents." He shrugged. "Seemed useful." "It is. Very." She hesitated. "I have a young client who might qualify. Actually, single mother died recently. Grandfather raising him now. Boy wants to learn welding. Have him apply. Deadline's next month." Delaney nodded. "I will." She turned to leave, then paused. "There's an auction for the Children's Center this weekend. Fundraiser. I'm on the committee." Another pause. "It's not a bad way to spend a Saturday evening, if you're interested." Coulter looked up from the carburetor he'd returned to. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but a softening. "What time?" "7. Riverside Lodge. I'll be there." After she left, Tanner appeared from under a lifted truck, grinning. "Was that what I think it was? A fundraiser invitation?" "Yes. Come on, man. She was asking you out." Coulter returned to his work. "Maybe. And you said yes. To a fundraiser." Tanner laughed. "Baby steps. Still, it's good. Life moving forward and all that." Coulter didn't respond, but later, after the shop closed, he found himself researching the Children's Center online, reading about their programs, their needs. Then, before he could overthink it, he made a sizable anonymous donation that IT wasn't about Delaney. Not entirely. It was about building something new, something that didn't define itself by what it stood against, but by what it stood for. That night, as he sat on the deck of the lake house he'd reclaimed, not the family home, which held too many memories, but the property that had been hidden from him, Coulter watched the water ripple under a quarter moon and felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for years. He didn't miss them. Not the lies, not the weight, not the constant performance. Just peace, finally his own. The Children's Center auction was held in the timber-framed main hall of the Riverside Lodge, the space transformed with white lights and local floral arrangements. Coulter arrived precisely at 7, dressed in a charcoal suit that Tanner had insisted he have tailored for the occasion. "Coulter Briggs." Delaney greeted him at the welcome table, her professional demeanor softened by evident pleasure at his arrival. "I'm glad you could make it." "Said I would." He accepted the bidding paddle she handed him, momentarily surprised when her fingers brushed his. "There's an open bar, buffet dinner, and the silent auction items are displayed along the west wall," she explained, gesturing toward the crowded room. "The live auction starts at 8:30. Coulter nodded, then hesitated. "You'll be busy, I imagine." "For a while," she admitted. "But I've arranged to sit at table 12 during dinner. There's an empty seat beside me if you're interested." The directness of her invitation surprised him. No games, no hidden meanings, just a simple expression of interest that required an equally simple response. "I am," he said. Delaney smiled, warm and genuine. "Good. I'll see you then." Coulter made his way through the crowded room, nodding politely to acquaintances but avoiding lengthy conversations. He studied the silent auction items methodically, placing bids on a few that seemed worthwhile: a leather-bound set of classic books, a weekend fishing package, a custom knife from a local craftsman, and a tea dinner. He found table 12 and the empty seat beside Delaney, who was engaged in conversation with an elderly couple across the table. She smiled as he sat down, finishing her story before turning to him. "I was beginning to think you'd found better company," she said lightly. "Impossible," he replied, the word surprising him as much as her. Her eyes widened slightly before crinkling with pleasure. "Careful, Coulter." That almost sounded like flirting. "Been a while. Might be rusty. Seems to be working fine." She took a sip of wine. "I saw you bidding on the fishing package. Are you an avid fisherman?" "Used to be. Haven't gone in years." He didn't add that fishing had been his escape from home, his silent refuge that even Mallory had eventually poisoned by complaining about the time it took away from her needs. "My father loved fly fishing," Delaney said. "Taught me when I was 12. We used to go to the Deschutes River every summer." "Used to." "He passed away 5 years ago. Heart attack." "I'm sorry." She nodded her acknowledgement. "I still have his gear. Haven't used it since." Coulter recognized the unspoken parallel activities abandoned after loss, pieces of themselves set aside. Before he could respond, the auction director began announcing dinner, and conversation turned general around the table. Throughout the meal, Coulter found himself genuinely engaged by Delaney's presence. She was intelligent without being showy, compassionate without being saccharine. When she spoke about her work with at-risk teens, her dedication was evident but not self-righteous. She asked him about the shop with real interest, listening to his explanations of engine rebuilds and custom metal fabrication, as if they were fascinating rather than mundane. That IT had been so long since Coulter had experienced genuine interest from someone else that he almost didn't recognize it. The realization made him pause mid-sentence. "Is something wrong?" Delaney asked. "No," he said after a moment. "Just remembering what a real conversation feels like." Understanding flickered in her eyes. "It's been a while?" "Years," he admitted. "Maybe decades." The live auction began before they could delve deeper, but something had shifted between them, a recognition of shared experience despite their different paths. Coulter bid conservatively on most items, but when the auctioneer announced a complete welding setup donated by a local supplier, he raised his paddle without hesitation, countering each competing bid until it was his at nearly twice the retail value. "That was generous," Delaney said when he returned to the table after arranging payment. "And strategic for a welding shop owner." "Not for the shop," Coulter explained. "For your scholarship applicant. The boy who wants to learn welding." Delaney stared at him, genuinely surprised. "Coulter, that's remarkably thoughtful." He shrugged. "Equipment's half the battle in learning a trade. Having your own makes practice possible." "Still," she said softly. "Thank you." The auction concluded around 10, and as the crowd began to disperse, Delaney found herself finally free of her committee obligations. "Would you like to take a walk?" she asked Coulter. "The Riverside Path is lit this time of year. Might be nice after being inside all evening." The night air was cool but pleasant as they strolled along the illuminated Riverside Path. Neither spoke immediately, comfortable in the quiet broken only by the sound of the water and distant laughter from the lodge. "You've become something of a quiet hero in town," Delaney finally said. "People notice the scholarship foundation, the donations, the way you've handled everything without public drama." Coulter shook his head slightly. "Not trying to be a hero. That's precisely why you are one." She smiled at a skeptical look. "Heroes don't set out to be admired, Coulter. They just do what's right, especially when it's difficult. Nothing heroic about surviving betrayal. No, I think there's something profoundly brave about facing the truth of your life and changing course, instead of continuing to live the lie." They stopped at a small riverside overlook, the water dark and silver below them. "You speak from experience," Coulter observed. Delaney nodded. "My ex-husband. Not the same situation, but similar aftermath. The rebuilding. Learning to trust again myself. Mostly. And have you? Learned to trust again?" She turned to face him fully. "I'm here with you, aren't I?" The moment hung between them, charged with possibility. Coulter felt a pull toward her that had nothing to do with physical attraction, though that was certainly present. It was the recognition of someone who had walked through fire and emerged not unscathed, but unbroken. "I'm not the man I was a year ago," he said quietly. "Good," she replied without hesitation. That man was being hollowed out by people who didn't deserve him. Later, as he walked her to her car, Coulter felt a sense of potential he'd thought permanently extinguished. Not romance, necessarily, though that spark was undeniably present, but connection. Real connection with someone who saw him clearly and valued what she saw. "Would you like to have dinner sometime?" he asked as they reached her vehicle. "Not a fundraiser. Just dinner." Delaney smiled. "I like that very much." As he drove home to the lake house, Coulter realized he was building a legacy different from the one he'd envisioned in his youth. Not the traditional family legacy, but something perhaps more meaningful, a legacy of integrity, of second chances given not to those who had harmed him, but to himself and to others who deserved opportunity. And for the first time in years, he found himself looking forward rather than back. 3 weeks later, Coulter received a call from Gerald Monroe. "Mallory's filed for spousal maintenance," the attorney said without preamble. "She's claiming emotional trauma resulting from the marriage dissolution and seeking monthly payments." Coulter set down the wrench he'd been using. "On what grounds?" "The court already ruled. She's trying a different angle. Claims your emotional abandonment throughout the marriage left her unprepared for independence. She's got a psychiatrist's letter citing anxiety, depression, and PTSD. Convenient diagnosis. Indeed. And unfortunately, there's more." Rowan supported her claim, testifying that he witnessed your emotional abuse throughout his childhood. Coulter absorbed this information with outward calm, though a cold anger stirred beneath his composed exterior. "When's the hearing?" 2 weeks from Thursday. "I'm filing a comprehensive response, of course, but given the sympathy sometimes extended to—" "I understand," Coulter interrupted. "Do what's necessary." He hung up and returned to the engine he'd been rebuilding, his movements precise but carrying a new tension. Just when he'd started moving forward, they were dragging him back into their games. That evening, as he sat on his deck watching the sunset over the lake, his phone rang again, a number he didn't recognize. "Hello, Mr. Briggs." A male voice, vaguely familiar. "This is Jason Clark from Clark Legal Services. I represented Callum Sayers in some matters last year." Coulter's attention sharpened. "What can I do for you, Mr. Clark?" "It's about what I can do for you, actually. Callum left some documents with me before leaving town. Documents I believe would interest you given your ongoing legal situation with Mallory Briggs." "What kind of documents?" "A notarized affidavit, among other things, detailing certain plans Ms. Briggs and your son discussed in the event you discovered their activities." Coulter's hand tightened on the phone. Why would Sayers document that? "Insurance," Clark said simply. "Callum may be many things, but he's not stupid. He realized he was being used as much as you were. When things went south, he wanted protection against potential allegations." "Why give it to me now?" "Honestly, because he's gone, but I still practice law in this town. I've seen the court records. What they did, what they're continuing to do, crosses ethical lines I'm not comfortable with." Coulter considered this. "I'll need to verify the document's authenticity." "Of course. I've already sent copies to Gerald Monroe. The originals are in a sealed envelope in my office safe, available for examination by court-appointed experts if necessary." After ending the call, Coulter sat in the gathering darkness, turning this new development over in his mind. He believed the legal battles were nearing conclusion. Now it seemed they had entered a new phase, one that might finally expose the full extent of Mallory and Rowan's betrayal. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in late June. The courtroom was more crowded this time. Word had spread about Mallory's new claims, and local curiosity had drawn a small audience of onlookers. Coulter sat beside Gerald, his posture straight, his expression impassive as Mallory took the stand. She looked thinner than before, her designer clothes replaced by a modest dress that emphasized her apparent fragility. Her performance was masterful, voice trembling at appropriate moments, eyes downcast, the perfect picture of a woman wounded by decades of emotional neglect. "He never hit me," she explained to her attorney. "It wasn't that kind of abuse. It was the silence, the coldness, the way he would withdraw affection when I didn't meet his expectations, the constant implication that I was never good enough, never contributing enough." Walsh nodded sympathetically. "And how has the divorce affected you emotionally?" "I can barely function some days. Mallory said, her voice breaking. The anxiety is crippling. I have nightmares about being homeless, penniless. After dedicating my life to our family, I've been discarded like I meant nothing. Her testimony continued for nearly an hour, painting a picture of Coulter as an emotionally distant tyrant who had controlled her through financial means and icy disapproval. Rowan followed with similar claims, describing a childhood dominated by his father's rigid expectations and minimal affection. Throughout, Coulter remained outwardly calm, though Tanner, watching from the back row, could see the tightness in his jaw, the controlled anger in his stillness. When it was Gerald's turn for cross-examination, he approached Mallory with deliberate calm. "Mrs. Briggs, you've testified today about suffering emotional trauma from your marriage. When did you first seek professional help for these issues?" Mallory hesitated. "About 2 months ago, so after the divorce proceedings began. Not during the 28 years of alleged emotional abuse. I didn't recognize it as abuse then. I thought it was normal." Gerald nodded. "I see. And these financial concerns, you mentioned fears of homelessness and poverty. Could those be related to the fact that you no longer have access to Mr. Briggs's income rather than any emotional trauma?" "Objection," Walsh called, badgering the witness. "I'm simply asking about the timing of her symptoms, Your Honor," Gerald replied. "Overruled," Judge Kinsey said. "The witness will answer." Mallory's composure slipped slightly. "Of course I'm worried about money. Anyone would be after losing their security. Security you lost because you committed financial fraud," Gerald reminded her. "Now, regarding your claims about Mr. Briggs's emotional withholding, I have here credit card statements showing you purchased anniversary gifts, birthday presents, and vacation packages throughout your marriage. Does that align with your characterization of him as emotionally withholding?" "Gifts aren't the same as emotional presents," Mallory countered. "Indeed," Gerald agreed. "Let's talk about emotional presence then. I have here phone records showing that during the period you claim Mr. Briggs was emotionally abandoning you, you were exchanging hundreds of text messages with Callum Sayers, often while Mr. Briggs was working overtime at his shop to pay for the lifestyle you demanded." Mallory's face hardened. "That's twisting things. Perhaps we should untwist them then." Gerald turned to the judge. "Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to introduce a new piece of evidence that has recently come to light. A notarized affidavit from Callum Sayers." Walsh was on his feet immediately. "Objection. This is the first we're hearing of this evidence. It wasn't included in pre-trial disclosures. The document only came into our possession last week, Your Honor," Gerald explained. "We've had it authenticated and have submitted it to the court as soon as practicable." Judge Kinsey examined the document thoughtfully. "I'll allow it, but I want to see the authentication report." Gerald handed over another folder. "Included with the submission, Your Honor." As the judge reviewed the documents, Mallory whispered urgently to Walsh, her mask of vulnerability completely gone, replaced by naked alarm. "Mrs. Briggs," Gerald continued when given permission, "are you familiar with the contents of this affidavit?" "No," she said tightly. "How would I be?" "Then let me summarize for the court. Mr. Sayers states under oath that you and your son, Rowan, discussed a contingency plan should Mr. Briggs discover your affair and financial activities. This plan included, and I quote, creating a narrative of emotional abuse and control to maximize financial settlement and maintain access to Briggs's assets." The courtroom went completely silent. "Further," Gerald continued, "Mr. Sayers attests that you specifically stated, and again I quote, if Coulter ever finds out and tries to leave, I'll destroy him. I'll make sure everyone in town thinks he's a monster. Rowan will back me up, and no one will question a devoted wife and son." Mallory's face had drained of color. "That's a lie. Callum's trying to hurt me because I broke things off." "Interesting theory," Gerald replied. "However, the affidavit is dated months ago, well before your relationship ended. Additionally, Mr. Sayers included text messages between you and him discussing this very strategy. He placed copies of the messages before Mallory. One highlighted exchange read, "Mallory, if worst happens, you know the plan. I play victim, Rowan backs me up, we go after everything. Callum, What if Coulter has evidence? Mallory, of what? Being cold? Distant? No one can prove or disprove emotional abuse. That's the beauty of it. Mallory stared at the messages, then looked up at Gerald with naked hatred. You can't prove these are real. Actually, we can. The phone carrier has authenticated them from server records. And Mr. Sayers provided access to his cloud backup, which contains the complete message history. Walsh was frantically reviewing the documents, his expression increasingly grave. Meanwhile, Rowan sat in the gallery, face ashen, eyes darting between his mother and the exit. Judge Kinsey had seen enough. I think we'll take a brief recess. Counselors, in my chambers. Now. The recess lasted nearly an hour. When court reconvened, Walsh looked defeated, Mallory furious, and Gerald calmly confident. Judge Kinsey addressed the court directly. Based on the evidence presented, including the newly introduced affidavit and supporting documentation, I am dismissing the petition for spousal maintenance with prejudice. Furthermore, I find that this claim was brought in bad faith, representing an attempt to defraud the court. She turned her stern gaze on Mallory. Mrs. Briggs, I am ordering you to pay Mr. Briggs's legal fees for this frivolous action. Additionally, I am referring this matter to the district attorney for potential perjury charges, as the evidence strongly suggests you have knowingly provided false testimony. Mallory's face contorted with rage, the mask of vulnerability completely abandoned. This is outrageous. After everything I've done, Mrs. Briggs, Judge Kinsey interrupted sharply, I strongly advise you not to continue that statement. You are already facing potential criminal charges. Don't make it worse. As the judge concluded the proceedings, Mallory turned to Coulter, her eyes burning with hatred. This isn't over, she hissed. You think you've won, but you'll never. It is over, Mallory, Coulter said quietly, speaking directly to her for the first time in months. It was over the moment you decided I was worth more to you as a bank account than as a husband. He turned and walked away, ignoring her continued threats. Outside the courtroom, Tanner met him with a supportive clap on the shoulder. That affidavit was a stroke of luck, Tanner said as they descended the courthouse steps. Luck had nothing to do with it, Coulter replied. Sayers was protecting himself all along. He knew exactly who he was dealing with. So what now? Really is over this time? Coulter nodded. For me, it has been for months. Now the courts agree. As they reached Tanner's truck, Coulter spotted Delaney waiting near his own vehicle. She'd attended the hearing at his invitation, understanding that her presence offered a kind of support different from Tanner's, not the solidarity of old friendship, but the promise of new beginnings. Go on, Tanner said, noticing her too. I'll see you at the shop tomorrow. Coulter walked to where Delaney stood, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders with each step. You did it, she said simply. We did, he corrected. Your counseling sessions those first weeks, they helped me see clearly when I needed it most. She smiled. My professional opinion? You're going to be just fine, Coulter Briggs. Better than fine, he said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. For the first time in years, I'm looking forward to what comes next. And what is that? Dinner with you would be a good start, he said. If the offer still stands. Her smile widened. It does. As they walked to their separate cars, planning to meet later that evening, Coulter felt no triumph, no vindication, just peace, and the quiet certainty that he had finally broken free of the hollow house he'd lived in for so long. Coulter sat on the deck of the lake house as the summer sun began its slow descent behind the mountains. The water reflected the golden light, rippling gently in the evening breeze. A second Adirondack chair sat beside his, no longer empty as it had been for months after he'd claimed the property. Delaney would arrive soon. Their twice-weekly dinners had evolved naturally into something deeper over the past 6 months, a relationship built on mutual respect, shared understanding, and a kind of honest communication Coulter had forgotten was possible. The Scholarship Foundation was thriving, having funded trade school education for 5 students in its first year. The welding equipment he'd purchased at the auction had gone to a promising young man who now apprenticed at the shop on weekends. The business continued to grow, allowing Coulter to work fewer hours without sacrificing quality or prosperity, He heard occasionally about Mallory and Rowan through town gossip, though he sought no information himself. Mallory had apparently taken a job at a real estate office in Redmond, 30 miles away. Rowan had, surprisingly, enrolled in community college, working part-time to support himself. Their fall from grace had been public and complete the town's sympathy firmly with Coulter, especially after the truth had emerged in court. But Coulter took no pleasure in their struggles. He simply acknowledged the consequences of choices made long ago and continued building his own life without reference to theirs. The sound of tires on gravel announced Delaney's arrival. She emerged from her car with a bottle of wine and a smile that still surprised him with its genuine warmth. No performance, no hidden agenda, just genuine affection. "Beautiful evening," she said, joining him on the deck. "Better now," he replied, the words coming easier these days as they sat watching the sunset, talking comfortably about their day. Coulter reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The collapse in his shop that had begun it all now seemed like fate rather than misfortune, the breaking point that had forced him to see truth he'd avoided for years. He didn't miss them. Not the lies, not the weight, just peace. And when he looked in the mirror each morning, he no longer saw the man who had been betrayed. He saw the man who had survived it, who had, against all odds, found something genuine in the ruins of deception, who had built a legacy not of blood or name, but of integrity and second chances, who had, finally, learned to give nothing to those who hadn't earned it and everything to the few who had.